Back when we were talking about ignition coil basics, we said that the primary and the secondary are connected by the magnetic coupling. Let's see what that looks like when we look at the two patterns that happen when we look at the primary and the secondary on a scope pattern at the same time. Look at the left. We go from 0 to 200 volts. That's the primary in blue. Look on the right. We go from 0 to 9 kV or 9,000 volts. But look at the shape of the two patterns. They are identical. This shows you how closely they're coupled. Everything we show you about measuring and testing the shape of the waveform in either the primary or the secondary applies to both of them. The difference is the size of the voltage. Let's go look at that voltage and see what it looks like. What's going to happen is we're going to have voltage that increases and goes up as we look at this. This voltage right here on the left is going to increase until it causes a spark. In this case, it's going up with 25 kV at the top. There's about 5 kV for each grid. This is about 17 kV, well under 20 kV. At the time the spark occurs, we will have current flow, and current flow will cause the voltage to drop. Now, lean mixtures, worn spark plugs, high plug wire resistance, even the resistors in the spark plugs that are worn will cause this voltage to be higher. Now let's talk about this problem with this higher voltage. Initially, you may think, well, we've got plenty of voltage available. We still have a spark. That's true. But we're running strictly at idle here. During hard acceleration and so forth with higher demands, this voltage will go higher. The problem arises when the continued stress of this high voltage is applied either to the coil-on plugs or DIS modules. The insulation breaks down. We get carbon tracking. People say, how could carbon tracking possibly occur on a glass or ceramic spark plug? Because it gets a little moisture, the voltage demands are excessively high, and bingo, you've got carbon tracking, and now the resistance is low. So these worn spark plugs, these bad wires, the lean fuel mixtures, they are primary causes, and you may be treating the end result of bad modules, bad coil-on plug units, whatever, because of one of these problems. We want to take time to stress that because it's so important. You go and see what kind of how many thousand volts is the secondary running, because it will change the life expectancy of the ignition components. Now, once the voltage drops down, we have current flowing. It's typically in the 1.3 to 4 kV range. It's almost always under 6 kVs, particularly on DIS. The only time you might see it any higher than 6 kV is if you have an old distributor. And they should be even on all cylinders. They should start at the same point. Now, the starting point tells us about the resistance in the wiring and the spark plug resistor outside of the cylinder. We're going to talk more about that later, but this starting point is set by that. If it's higher than 6, it's usually caused by a bad spark plug, although they usually show up more during hard acceleration. Wire resistance that's too high or resistance in the spark plug that's excessive are all going to make these start up higher. So when you see one starting higher, bingo, the alarm bells go off. There is something outside the cylinder adding resistance, causing the voltage to be higher. Here's a perfect example. This second cylinder here, if you look very carefully, there are two sparks. One starts up on the second grid where the arrow's pointing, and then it drops down higher than all the rest. This is a typical example of a bad plug wire. The other thing we frequently see about secondary resistance is you notice how that pattern slopes down and to the right. That's typical of resistance in the secondary. So here is an exact problem. The voltage here is not excessively high, but this wire is going to continue to get worse until pretty soon it's going to break through and stop working. Now, this is another example of a bad wire and some other things going on. We're off idle. But look, everything else is running pretty easy. This one cylinder has a real problem. And we're going to talk about multiple problems later on. I don't want to bring it in now and overcomplicate it. Voltage starts higher when there's excess resistance in the wiring and in the spark plug resistance outside the cylinder. Now, we can also look at compound problems, and we're going to talk more about that later. The other side of this problem is when it's too low. Voltages below 3 kV are arcing outside the cylinder. It's usually caused by bad plug wires, leaking plug wires, or carbon tracking, or punch through an insulation of the DIS module, or whatever. You should not, if there's not a logical way, one cylinder should be firing much easier than all the rest unless it has no compression. Look, here's our bad plug wire again. We are looking at multiple problems here. This one is reading right at 0 volts. It takes very little voltage to cause this current to flow. Now, current flow is very high. We have a lot of current flow. But it's not inside the cylinder. It's outside the cylinder. Now, mind you, to see this, we had to record this. As I warned you earlier, sometimes you have to make recordings, come back and study them. We had to record this and come back frame by frame. This is frame 35 out of 50 we recorded at 650 RPM, or 675 RPM. That's what we're talking about. This happened for just one brief moment. It's not there all the time. Yes, this is the same engine we had with a bad plug wire. We're talking about multiple problems, but we're even going to go beyond that some more too. Look at the link in the shape of the spark line. This is the current flow we talked about occurring in the secondary from the power produced in the primary. When we have enough current, this lasts at least 1.5 milliseconds, typically. That's what we expect to see. It's always over 0.9. Now, why does it last so long? Well, it lasts a long time like this because that's the amount of power, the energy that's in the primary, transferring into the secondary. It has to drain all that the voltage generated and the power generated through the arc. And the arc is supposed to last for about half the flame front. The flame front on most vehicles is around 3 milliseconds. So 1.5 milliseconds of spark gives us flame front, spark for the first half of the flame front. Now notice at the end, it dips up. That dip up at the end tells us how much energy is left after the spark goes out. And so does the first negative spike going down to 0. When those grow larger than what you're looking at here, it's telling us there's something going on that's keeping the coil from losing all of its energy. Now, in this particular case, we're approaching 25 kV. This is pretty high voltage. There's energy left over. There's something going on here. We'll go more detail on that later. But for a short duration spark, look at primary coil current. Look at the spark plug condition. Check the condition of the coil. Because if this is shorter than a normal spark, we're not transferring enough energy to give us a good fire. We want it to be flat. And the slight arc at the end, we're going to use diagnostically. You're going to see it more as we get into this. We're looking at all single patterns now. Very soon, we're going to throw a bunch of patterns up at once and pick all these pieces out one at a time because it's important to us. Now look at the shape of this. Once we start the spark, voltage increases. Remember the basics we hammered home. Voltage in the secondary will rise when resistance increases. This is telling us that there is a resistance change inside the cylinder after we seal the intake valve. It started off normal, but it's going up. What's happening is we're in the lean out. We're burning out part of the fuel to where it's the point there's less fuel available, and mixture resistance starts increasing it because the mixture is short on fuel. You're looking for a fuel lean out? Here. If it's on all cylinders, go look for low fuel pressure. If it's on a few cylinders, look for vacuum leaks, look for lean fuel injectors, and look how much energy is left over in this spark. That first wave is higher. Look at the height of the first positive wave in the oscillations when it goes out. When it's excessively high, like you see here, we have a lot of voltage left in, a lot of energy left in the coil. It's going to ring more. And we're up around 25 kV. So here's a prime example of lean fuel mixture. Again, what do? This is going to give you a diagnostic direction. If it's on all cylinders, your direction is to go check fuel pressure, fuel filter, fuel pump, and anything else that's common to the delivery of all the fuel to these cylinders. We could have a major vacuum leak messing everything up. And we're going to show you some special patterns for EGR, so don't get concerned about them yet. But if there's only one cylinder that's lean, check the injector. Check that manifold runner for a vacuum leak on that cylinder. Check for leaking O-rings around that injector. We have found that on more than one occasion. This uneven shape says resistance is going up and down as the cylinder fires. And there's a lot of energy left in the coil after it goes out. This is caused by EGR, uneven flow, uneven mixing of the fuel. It's caused by leaking intake and exhaust valves. It's caused by blown head gaskets. It's caused by problems in the cylinder heads. Anything inside the cylinder that's allowing the mixture to change or to be unevenly distributed. The EGR calls this uneven distribution. It's not perfectly mixed when it's excessive amount of EGR. Now, you expect to see a little bit of noise like this show up when you come off idle and the EGR opens, but it should not be excessive. In this case, we're at 684 RPM. This is idle, and we have excessive turbulence. We've got to go find out why. You begin to get the picture here. Each piece of this has special meaning. We look at it one piece at a time. So we're going to go check for our EGR. We're going to go check for engine mechanical. And we could have a dribbling pattern on our injectors. So look at the whole list of things that can possibly cause unatomized, uneven fuel delivery. Now, if the oscillation at the end, as we've said so long, it's the energy remaining in the coil after the spark goes out. The higher the resistance, the bigger these ringings are. And we're going to be using that diagnostically later on to do for a lot. We expect to see at least one or two oscillations. It depends on the coil design. If they're all missing, we've got a weak coil and something bad's going wrong. So we should have some oscillations. Now here is some multiple problems we're going to look at. Look at that lean out. This is at 777 RPM. It's not some ungodly high number. We're also going to be talking about multiple problems. Well, let's look at the multiple problems. This shows a lean out condition. And this one shows a lean out condition. We got 4 cylinders showing it. But look at cylinder number 6. Not only does it show a lean out, the voltage starts much higher than all the other cylinders. Do you see how easy this is? Now, do we have lean out on all cylinders? No. We've got 3 or 4 that are worse than others. Are they coming to a runner? Doesn't look like it. So we're going to need new plug wires. Or at least we absolutely need a plug wire on 6. And if you believe like I believe, they all suffered the same abuse, you'll put all 6 plug wires on. Now, several summers ago, we had a situation. Take a look at cylinders 2, 5, 3. They're particularly high. We had a situation where we had a lot of failures in a hot summer on a fleet of cars. They had breakdown in the insulation and the DIS modules breaking the insulation and arcing the ground. They blamed it on poor quality modules. We found that much of their fleet was running very lean mixtures because the quality of fuel they had dirtied up the injectors. So this is the root cause, sometimes, of premature coil on plug and DIS module failures. Do not overlook that. So, multiple problems? Yes, we can find multiple problems. Send us in 2 directions at the same time. Bad wires. Look at individual injectors. We have some that have normal fuel delivery, others that don't. Is there a pattern? Look at all that before you go on. And make sure you replace everything that's bad. Don't ignore the bad wire, okay? This is what happened. After that vehicle was cleaned up, we flushed out the injectors, we cleaned the fuel rails, we ran chemical fog through to take all the carbon out of the intake, off the back of the intake valves, and we replaced the plug wires. Is it perfect? No. We still have a little bit of lean out. A little bit. But look how much better it is. We're back off of that going off scale on 25 kV. We're on scale now. It's the exact same vehicle. This is what it looks like when you repair it. Yeah, it's high mileage. It has some variation, but it's a lot better than it was. So, high secondary ignition voltage can cause second level failures. We keep stressing that. Secondary high voltage during moisture condition can cause carbon tracking, and we've seen that. EGR failures can show up and cause big changes in the spark line that range from lean to rich, all within the spark line and varying around. It's caused by turbulence of uneven fuel distribution. Here's an example. Good on the right, extreme turbulence on the left. The excessive EGR and leaking valves, usually exhaust valves, are the typical cause of this type of turbulence. What's causing this is the changing mixture resistance. It's increasing and decreasing and causing it to move around erratically. Now, let's go another level deeper. We've attacked basically one little thing at a time. We've looked at the spike. We've looked at the spark shape. We've looked at the ringing. Let's look at the whole pattern together. Let's talk about these coil oscillations. They happen when we turn the coil current on. If you remembered when we were talking about measuring the amperage of the coil, we said you should have small oscillations at turn on. Well, those small oscillations at turn on are right here in this pattern. Boom, there they go, come back to zero. Let's go have a look. I want you to compare the turn-on oscillations of all cylinders. Now, this is one of our newer high-resolution scopes on a PC. We get much more resolution. We love the little scope we worked with before. It showed up things nicely. And yes, you're going to see a whole bunch of things wrong with this pattern. But let's take them one step at a time and put the whole picture together. Sort of like developing a Polaroid picture. Let's start off by identifying where current flow turns on and causes that first downward spike. There it is, there. These are all the places where current flow turns on. We have to have current flow to build up a magnetic field, so we open it, we get a voltage spike. Now, next question. Compare that first big dip when it closes on all these cylinders. Have a look at them. Let's magnify this so we can get a good look. I want you just to compare these three. Do you see anything unusual going on here? Is that a nice long downward spike there below the dotted line? Yeah, looks good. That means we have good coil energy. We've got good current flow. Because we had a lot of current flow, we get big spikes downward. That means current flow started quickly. Is there anything else going on here? How about this one? This is not a real good spark. It's very short. Doesn't go down as far. This is low primary power. We're not going to have as much energy in this particular spark. We don't have as much current. This particular cylinder will have less current than the one on the right we just looked at. And the one on the far left, it's longer than this, not as long as the other. We got three different lengths. We got different power applied to three different coils. Let's go and look at some more stuff here and analyze this some more. I cannot blow it up without talking about some other things here. Like, look where spark voltage starts there. Starts extremely high. We have the red line at the bottom showing you kind of where the downward spikes are running. And we've got this blue line in here from the main pattern showing you typically where the spark lines start. So we say, wow, we have a bad spark plug wire. Yes, we do. What do you see here? You see it sloping downward like we talked about before. You see it starting much higher. And we said when you have high resistance, there's other things that happen. Remember we talked about the first oscillations and stuff where the spark goes out? The coil energy left here, if it's very high, we have high spikes. Look how deep and long that leftover coil energy spike is when we have a bad spark plug. Now go and compare it to the other two. Do you see the big difference? We had higher resistance, higher voltage, more voltage left in the coil when the spark goes out because there is resistance and we run out of energy. All right, let's go compare all the spark lines now and see what they look like. We magnified some earlier and we saw some wrong. Let's take a look at all of them and see what we spot. There is where the spark starts. Remember, that's determined by the resistance in the secondary. It's outside of the cylinder, the start of spark. Do you notice there are any that are different? Is there something we should be looking in particular? Okay, let's pick out some and blow them up here. We'll pick out this group right here. I want you to look on the first one. The shape is basically going down, starts just a little bit high. The middle one, the slope is upward. We said it goes upward when there's mixture leaning out in the cylinder. Then it goes down to the right, and it's a high voltage, it's a high spike. So right off the bat, we see a couple things. Two of them on the right are definitely higher than the average, and they have different shape. One shape is telling us it starts high, and it's leaning out, leaving a lot of energy in the coil. The one on the far right says it has a lot of energy, and it's sloping downward. Now, let's take a look. The spark line increases as mixture leans out during the burn. That's obvious. Now, the next thing you're going to see is that leftover coil energy, when the spark stops, goes much higher because of the lean mixture. we have high internal resistance. So that leftover coil voltage goes much higher. So right off the bat, when you see that higher spike going up there, take a look and see if that is looking like a normal wave shape. We don't have to get down to individual ones. Let's go look even further and see what else we can see. Going down, looking in here and saying, yes. Going back here, let's see what this guy looks like. He starts higher. He drops much lower. It's one of the lowest readings on the secondary, the first positive spike. High resistance causes to have a high downward spike if it's outside the resistance. We can have them both high together like we did before. So what we've been doing here is finding multiple problems. We found some coils don't have as much energy as others. Is there any combination we can see together with that? Well, these guys all start too high. We got to have plug wires. That's part of our combination. Let's identify ones with lower voltage. Got lower voltage than anyone else. Wonder what could possibly be adding to that. Identify cylinders with high positive energy after the coil stops. We just talked about that. This one's high. This one's high. Those would go look at the injectors and resistance in the system. Let's look at the ones with the lower positive energy. How low do the positive ones go? Well, this one right here is not very low. That one's not very low. They don't have much energy. There's very little left over. What else do we know about those two cylinders? Remember, those are the two where we have weak current flow at turn on. Look at our turn on current. It's weak on both of those. Is it surprising that we have a low voltage spike, we have low leftover energy in the coil because we have less power in that system? Look, these all go together. We checked the primary current here and found it to be low. Coil resistance on that particular coil was erratic as the connector was moved around. It was a bad coil. It's as simple as that. We replaced the coil and it fixed a random misfire. Why is it random? You put under enough load and you didn't have enough energy to fire it under extreme firing conditions. This is the type of stuff we find when we go to looking and say, whoa, look why we had bad contact. It was not that particular coil. This is another one we found earlier. But we want you to remember things like this. So kind of to summarize this, look at these lean outs. Look at high resistance as an example and lean outs. Two problems at once. Look for ones that are shorted out, not arcing to ground. Creating carbon tracking like this. Look for EGR, which is causing turbulence. This could also be caused by a leaking exhaust valve. Sometimes looks very much like this. And blown head gaskets. What we've done is we've looked at each part of the pattern independently and related problems and symptoms to the details in that pattern. Well, now, what else could you have done to identify problems that could be caused by so many different things in one set of patterns? We saw fuel lean out, carbon tracking, coil problems, excessive EGR flow, leaking valves, one spark plugs, all with one test. Yes, it takes a few minutes to hook this up, but it's definitely worth the investment and return. It identifies more problems, reduces comebacks, increases your sales. Don't ignore that. It makes your fleet more reliable if you happen to be one of our lucky fleet customers who don't have to worry about selling things. And remember the second thing, the opening slide says the shapes we see in the secondary are exactly the same in the primary. If you can't get access because of coil on plug location, use the coil primary and get the same type of information. Let's move on from here into fuel.